Good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed the morning. There was something in there for everybody, I sensed, talking to many of you at lunchtime. I'm delighted to just pop back and introduce our first keynote speaker today. And Geraldine Strathdy is a psychiatrist who worked in Oxley's for some time and has always had a huge passion for mental health, and now mental health policy getting right into the centre of this government and the next whatever government's thinking will be. 18 months into a tremendous contribution as the mental health lead at NHS England. We have Geraldine Strathdy here for you. If you give a round warm applause, because she came last year as well. And you're going to talk to us about mental health, evidence-based technological transformation. We'll look forward to it, Geraldine.
Lovely.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Mike, and thank you very much indeed, Mindtech, for inviting me back. And it's really interesting because I actually, thinking about talking at this presentation, I looked at my slides from last year, because there's always that sense of what's been achieved, what's happened, what's moved. And I have to say, I think despite the fact that last year was such an amazing tsunami of change in the whole health and social care world, I think you guys have just been absolutely amazing in the leadership you've shown in progressing this agenda. What I suppose I would like to do is two things really. One is to give you a sense of what's happening at kind of national policy, national kind of government level. So a year ago, we talked about parity. I think the words parity had just begun to kind of bubble realistically onto the agenda. Today, I see across the entire country an amazing army. We have, I would say, a minimum of 25,000 people who say, I understand about mental health. I want to do something. I want to champion mental health. We've seen across the country, and interestingly, probably driven through the Crisis Concordat, which is an area of intervention that so needs your skills to help us with. But I go to launch events of Crisis Concordat. I go to action planning events for the Crisis Concordat. 22 agencies in the rooms. As I often say, I have never spent so much time on dog tracks, race tracks, football pitches, cricket pitches as I have this year, because every event I go to, there's a minimum of 300 people talking about mental health. Not talking about it how they used to, which is mental health's rubbish, health services never there when I need it, but actually police officers, ambulance drivers, fire chiefs, housing people, school teachers, college people, lots of others saying, we get that, the creation of positive mental health, the understanding of health. The best way to support people with mental health is everybody in society's business. This is not just the business of the health service. We have to identify the causes of mental ill health, and each of us in our own way as community agencies need to help tackle and address those causes. So are there any concrete policy signs of this? Because I'll come on to funding in a bit. Concrete policy signs. Well, NHS England, with the other 7 lead agencies, published the 5-year forward view a few weeks back in October. There were 3 specialities mentioned only by name in that 36-page 5-year forward view for the health service in England. Dementia, Prime Minister's own championed cause, cancer, and mental health. It must be the first time in a national forward view for 5 years forward view that mental health has had such prominence. And the thing that is in there is saying that we know that in mental health, we know what the gap is, both in terms of addressing stigma, in terms of the parity of access to evidence-based interventions and measurement of outcomes, and we know what the funding gap is. And so when that paper was produced, you will see that Nick Clegg then went on to talk about figures of the order of £500 million a year, every year for the next 10 years for adult services, and the same for children. Now, that whole thinking about, so what actually is the gap in mental health, is very important that that is right on the agenda and being talked about publicly. And this morning, You're obviously far too busy here, I could see from your tweets. Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, announced, again, for the first time, something that we've been wanting for probably the last 5-6 years, which is a pan-government mental health commission. So this is with people like Theresa May. It's people from employment, from justice, from education, from health, from social care, meeting at that high level in government to talk about addressing the causes and prevention of mental ill health, really speeding up what we can do to close the gap for people with common mental health conditions, where at the minute, less than 30% of people get any intervention at all, and actually looking at how do we act to reduce variation for the kind of effective care that people get in specialist services across the country. And very much thinking about how do we integrate care? How do we integrate care, physical and mental, together in primary care, in acute trusts, in community provider services, and in all the other kind of range of services we're doing. So compared to this time last year, when I have to say we all thought, will the word parity keep us up the agenda? Will it actually lead to any government, treasury, cabinet office, policy makers' attention? I feel very pleased to be here this year saying we're right up there. If I can come back next year and say, I'm really pleased to be here, and we all, because it will only be us, we are the they, not just people in government, who will persuade the public, policymakers, people who make decisions about money. We are the people who will make the compelling arguments. We and the people we serve. Because I genuinely believe that what has changed people's opinion is that the narrative on mental health has changed. It's changed because service users are talking about their alcohol problem, their eating disorder, their perinatal condition, their depression, when they went for treatment and they couldn't find any, and the fact that once they get treatment, they can get back to work. They can get back to being the sort of neighbor they want to be. They can get back to being a contributing citizen. All those awful myths we have suffered from in mental health, which has led to the stigma, which is that mentally ill people are just weak. It's all social induced. You can't teach anybody resilience or emotional strength. We have no evidence-based treatments. Economically, it's not a good investment. Every single one of those arguments has been knocked down one by one in this last year, and particularly by the voice of people with mental ill health being brave enough to speak out, because they can convey what it's like, what it would be like if you had cancer and you know you only had 1/3 of a chance of treatment, what it would be like if you were diabetic and you had only 24% of treatment. They can convey what is it like for them as individuals and their families to know that they will not get treatment or get it so long from when they need it that actually outcomes are going to be poorer anyway. So that's the kind of dialogue that is changing people's minds across the country. And thank you, because I think your ability, because I recognize many of your faces, even though I haven't met you as people, because you are the social media great people. So the more of you that are out there with your innovations, publicizing them, really activating social media, activating the movement to show what positive mental health can do in our society, you are the people who are influencing. You may have noticed, many of you, that suddenly the Treasury's joined Twitter. The Cabinet Office has joined Twitter. I can't remember how many MPs have joined Twitter. Clinical commissioning groups have joined Twitter. Huge amount of activity is now happening in social media, so you are among the leaders who can actually do the persuading. So thank you again. So, what I suppose at the end of the day I want to come back to is, well, why are we doing all this anyway? And I think we're doing it for the following reason. So let me just, and I'm not going to give this whole talk because I had to come from a rather strange, distant part of the country this morning, like Cornwall. I won't go through my whole slides, but I just wanted to start by saying this is, at the end of the day, what we're trying to change. We're trying to use to see what would, if we got information, informatics, intelligence, technology right, what actual impact would that have on the lives of the people that we are here to serve? And in a sense, this is what it's like at the moment, but things are improving. So do people know where to get information about their condition, about the treatments on offer, about the choices they can make? Do people feel confident that if they go and see their GP and then they have to go into an acute hospital, an A&E, a mental health hospital, that the information will be transferred, that their blood tests, that their things that they need will be monitored? If you're a child going to school, young people, and things start going a bit difficult for you, do you know which services are available in your local area? Some of the absolute fundamental basics are still big, big issues for us in the mental health world. And I suppose what the dream is that by 2020, this is what it will be like. That people will get information at the touch of a button that is reliable, is written in a language that they can understand, is often presented by peers, co-produced information that's easy for them to access. That people will be able to get an understanding of having positive mental health early enough for it to impact on prevention. That when people want to be safe, that they don't need to go ringing up. They don't need to go ringing up chasing for blood tests. They don't need to go ringing up chasing for when can they get an intervention, because we're going to make that. We're going to bring into healthcare and social care, whatever sector provides it, the same level of technology that makes people safe. Back and just talk to you about two very, very simple things. This is really my final slide, and as I say, sorry that it's a bit tight, but it probably summarizes about 20 slides I was going to give you. The first one is, since this time last year, what's new? Well, this time last year, the mental health pages on NHS Choices were, I think, about 5 years old. And thanks to my fabulous Wallard and the wonderful Nicola Hall, who is from NHS Choices, we now have up-to-date pages on NHS Choices. Superb YouTube videos, video diary, blogs from people who themselves have had mental health conditions explaining what it's about. You will probably see, and one of the reasons I'm having to go off the minute I stop this talk, is that we have a Secretary of State who is absolutely, totally determined to have the most transparent mental health service in the world, or the most transparent health service in the world. So you will start seeing on a website called My NHS, which is linked to eReferrer and linked to NHS Choices, which actually starts looking at what is the quality of care and services. The second thing is that we know that in the mental health world, the Digital Maturity Index, we had to, I think, have a little battle to make sure that mental health was included in the Digital Maturity Index surveys, but we're in there. And what that does show is that actually we in the mental health world we're not as digitally index mature as other sectors. Now, what does that mean? Well, we are the best sector in the whole health service in terms of our adaptation of electronic care records. I think it's almost 85% of all, and I'm talking, sorry, about specialist care providers now, 85% of specialist mental health sector use electronic records. Believe it or not, there are still many other sectors using pen and paper, using uni-professional records. We are very innovative. We like technology. But what we haven't got is digital maturity yet. So what do I mean by that? I mean the absolute basics. Things like making sure that we use the NHS number on all of the kind of records we've got. If you don't use a person's NHS number, it's less safe. GP can't see what tests have been done. Social care can't see what personalised budget's been done. We have to do it safely, but we are behind the rest of the system in terms of our use of NHS numbers. The second thing that I would love every one of you to think about, and I'm sorry, this may seem a bit boring to a group of innovators. So it's what I call just doing the blood pressure, or just looking at the teeth. There's some things you just can't not do, and I'm afraid one of them is coding. I've only discovered, and why I as a clinician would be the one to discover this, I have to say it's slightly beyond me, but I just am a very nosy woman. So I've kind of been looking into the funding allocation formula in mental health. And I've been looking into what's the financial weighting for the deprivation index. And I'm afraid
A lot of it is quite traditional, and it depends on the number of coded cases you have and activity. So if people are not identifying the kinds and natures of need that people have, co-produced with them, we are really losing out on mental health. At the minute, if you look at the Information Centre for Health and Social Care records, only 17% of mental health across the piece has any coding attached to it. Then you begin to wonder why we only get 17% of the budget, or 11% of the NHS budget. You begin to wonder why children and young people get 0.06% of the budget. So one of the things I would love you all to do when you're doing your innovation is also, can you tackle some of these basics? The NHS number, coding is absolutely critical. And those of you that are going to use your innovations with the systems, electronic records, whether it's primary care records or specialist records or acute trust records or community provider or third sector records, can you check, can you please go back today and check that they have two key functionalities? One is, or interoperability, one is that whatever system your organization is reprocuring or is procuring can communicate with primary care, community care, acute care, diagnostics, labs. Because unless we can do that communication, we truly are not able to keep people as safe as they need to be. We can't communicate what treatment someone's having. We give someone the same thing over and over again. The service user has to tell the story over and over again. And the second thing is the functionality. So again, we are a very mature sector, but most of our operating systems don't enable us to do things like send text reminders to people, drop-down menus to do decision clinician support. We don't have electronic prescribing with reminders, checks, drug interactions. We don't have reminders, electronic diagnostics that we can kind of see x-rays and ECGs. Can you think about building some of that basic stuff into what you're doing? Because it's that absolute procurement specification that is really at the heart of making things safer for people. The other thing that I suppose seems to me to be beginning to get huge pace. So one of the questions that we've been asked all the time is, but if you had this digital revolution, would it save any money? Good question. That, unfortunately, is not a question we can duck. So some of the ways in which people are using new technology, new innovations, new apps to make care more accessible is things like digital dictation. Now, One Trust, I don't know if they're represented here, Northumberland, Tyne and Wear, who've introduced digital dictation as part of teletriage, and very good teletriage, and have freed up time to care. So their staff, instead of seeing one person and having to travel around, are seeing 6 times more people because they can just digitally dictate at the end of an assessment. Now, if every organisation in the country had access to that kind of rapid, been able to give the service user a copy of the assessment, co-produced together, and been able to get remote access to what they're doing and using fantastic apps as an adjunct to care, that would become very, very cost effective. So my plea to all of you developing these new innovations is, can you, and I know you've talked about it this morning, think about the safety aspects. Think about how will they fit in with other systems, if that's something that is important. And thirdly, will the functionality be right? And can you think of a way that this will actually help the NHS in this era where, make no mistake, we are £31 billion adrift of having a health system in the future. So all of us have got to keep constantly thinking about greater effectiveness, greater quality, but also how does that kind of increase access and efficiency. I won't talk too much else about anything else on this, but I suppose just really to say that the great thing that has happened in the last year is the explosion of interest in mental health information and intelligence and informatics. I know that many of you have been very frustrated that we haven't been able to say, well, here's a national strategy. I will be honest with you, as you know, there's just a handful of people in the new system in central places. So We depend on you to help us bring that forward. But I don't think a single day goes by now without some other heavy-hitting, very, very interested set of people with influence, power and money saying, we really need to get in. Mental health has been left far too long without the attention that every other sector has. How can we come to help? So I hope I've said enough to say thank you so much indeed for the leadership you're showing. And if you invite me back next year, A, I won't come from Cornwall and risk having to mess around your agenda. And B, I hope I'll be bringing home some of the bacon. So thank you very much.